Malema delivering the party's election manifesto ahead of the 2019 national elections. Of course, highlighting a whole lot of policies that the party believe will empower the grassroots majority in the country. And Malema essentially just starting off by saying that the party's election manifesto is a practical solution to the country's problems, and really ending by calling for unity among the various political parties, saying there should be political tolerance, there should not be any violence, no bloodshed, saying that the only fight that should be happening is through the ballot paper, and encouraging EFF members to go in their numbers to campaign, of course, for the party ahead of the elections. I am, of course, joined by political analyst Khaya Sithole. Just in short, you heard he said that the manifesto is a practical solution to the country's problems. Would you agree in terms of what he highlighted?
I would say, based on what we've read and what he said out there, it is indeed a practical solution. Now, the problem, of course, is that do the resources to turn it or translate it into practice exist? So, for example, if he then says, as part of our manifesto, these are all the things that we're going to do if you guys put us into government, and then he says this is how we're going to realize those particular ideals, it sounds good on paper, and then the question should be, do the infrastructural resources that are required in order to make that happen exist? And unfortunately, in most instances, there is that gap between then saying, what are the instruments that you need in order to make those things happen, and do they currently exist? And if they don't exist, what is it that you're going to do in order to make it happen? So I do think that when you read a manifesto, of course, most of the things that people tend to put here are in theory very practical, but then you have to take a step back and say, given the existence of the state as we know it, given the way the state is currently configured, could any of these things be translated into action? And if they can't be done overnight, what would be that acceptable time frame to say, give me time to put this into place so that I can do that? And that's really what we're looking for in a manifesto.
Empowering the youth remains one of their biggest priorities, again highlighted by Malema, saying job creation is imperative for the party. He went on and even highlighted how he thinks factories should be rebuilt, restructured, upgraded, and even new factories that need to be built closer to people's homes as part of creating more jobs in a very short period of time.
Yeah, I think when you talk about how to fix the youth unemployment crisis, clearly nobody has stumbled upon the right formula yet. But we then hear the types of things that Malema and his team have come up with. These are the things that, if done correctly and if done with the right scale and probably with the right sort of techniques, they could deliver all of those things that we want in order for youth unemployment to be resolved. So of course, when he starts talking about factories, this is important, because what you really want to be doing is that you need to be creating things. A lot of people tend to think that we need to consume as much as we can, but of course, in order for people to be in a position to consume, they need to be able to generate money in the first place. So I think when you start talking about factories, then the question should be, okay, what are these industries where you feel that there's perhaps a gap in the value chain, and how do you plug this gap? When you say that you're going to talk about factories, what are the factories that you're going to be creating? What are they going to focus on? And do you actually have the skills capacity to then say, here's a factory you put out there, the youth must come in? Because there'll be nothing more tragic than putting up all these factories only to realize that the youth don't have the requisite skills in order for them to work in those factories. So of course, it becomes part of a bigger mission to then say, we're going to put this into place, but then we're going to ensure that the people that we're targeting, being the young people of South Africa, are then able to easily migrate into those places and actually start working.
Also talking about how he believes that we need more artisans, such as plumbers, electricians, and believing that that can create more entrepreneurs and independent workers.
Yeah. The important thing to understand about the conversation about artisans is that, unfortunately, over the past 10 to 15 years in South Africa, there's been this thinking that the only place where people can get any form of qualification is through the traditional university system. So of course, all our brightest young people want to be part of that system, which is by design very theoretical in nature. So what has happened then is that you've seen this emerging vacuum on the more practical and the more vocational skills where artisans will tend to fit in. So now that we've identified that we've got this looming crisis of people with practical skills in the form of artisans, everybody acknowledges that we need to be able to then drive more young people to sort of pursuing those skills. But of course, you need to make it very attractive to them. And how you make it attractive to them is that you create maybe the activity colleges that are supposed to train them. They need to be places of choice rather than bases of the last resort, which is what they are currently. So if those become places of choice, and people can then say, look, if I go to that institution, I'll be able to get the skills and it will give me the ability to really run my own affairs. Because I think when we talk about the essence of entrepreneurship, if a person says, for example, I'm a plumber, there's a person who says, on this particular day, I want to do 10 or 15 clients and I'll do it on my own without having to assign an employment contract. And that's a form of entrepreneurship that we should be driving, so that people can be more able to sort of run their own economic affairs rather than them having to join the unemployment queue, which unfortunately is way too long.
Now, land expropriation without compensation, with no doubt we expected him to really delve into that area very strongly, and he did. We heard him saying to the people, the land will be coming to you, talking about how they will be changing the constitution to, of course, fast track that particular policy. But the question that we have to ask here, in terms of the land issue, how does that actually, link in to the country's constitution? How practical is it? Is it just political rhetoric ahead of the election, or is it something that one can say, but it is doable, it is practical? You heard him saying agricultural land should be protected to safeguard food security, but talking about land expropriation, is it political rhetoric to just get votes, or what is really happening here?
The difficult part about the land conversation, of course, is that this is the one thing that the EFF has pursued very vigorously over the past 2 to 3 years during their term in Parliament. And what has then happened is that obviously they've then pushed the country at large to then explore this idea of a constitutional amendment. So we're already more than halfway into that particular stage. Right now, it's simply a question of what should the amendment look like. Now, the problem I've always highlighted, in particular to the EFF, is that unfortunately, changing the constitution will simply give the current government one additional available instrument of facilitating land reform. There is absolutely no guarantee that they would use such an instrument, as it were. So that remains the big sticking point on the whole question of changing the constitution. Now, obviously, in a manifesto of this nature, what the EFF is then supposed to say is that, look, we've managed to push for some form of an amendment to the constitution. That is definitely impending now. Once that does become reality, this is how we're going to utilize that particular instrument to then make things happen. So because right now we still don't know what that amendment is going to look like, and the EFF is not fully in control of that process, because of course it is now an open parliamentary process, it will simply say that they have to react to whatever that amendment looks like and then saying, this is how we're now going to make sure that land reform happens under the new guise of the new constitution.
Let's touch on the issue of minimum wage. Him saying that he is not currently happy with the tabled minimum wage. He's calling for 12,500, and of course he's listing here that builders should be getting 7,000, waiters 4,000, I think 500, and security guards also 7,000. But looking at the country's economy, is that practical though?
Now, the most important thing that we must remember is that that number 12,500 Rand is very historic as far as the EFF is concerned, because this is what the Marikana strikes were all about. So remember when they went to Marikana way back in 2014, I believe, and they spoke about launching their, their electoral campaign, they did say that they do acknowledge that there is a valid reason why miners would think that 12,500 Rand should be the basic minimum wage. So of course, why he wanted to highlight that today is to remind those people that he spoke to 4 or 5 years ago that we haven't forgotten about the commitment that we made to you in your capacity as miners. What he then also had to acknowledge is that since then, we've had the implementation of the national minimum wage of 3,500 Rand for qualifying workers. Now, the big problem, of course, is that everybody agrees that the current national minimum wage is not a living wage. So what you're then trying to do is to then say, now that we've got a baseline of this minimum wage, how do we then practically increase that or inflate that up until a place where somebody can say it is now a living wage? So what he's done is that he's then identified particular industries where perhaps the people in those industries have said to the EFF, look, as far as we're concerned, this is the type of wage that we think is necessary for us to feel that this economic compact is working for us. And the important thing here is that the EFF actually did spend a lot of time engaging with the people on the ground and then saying to them, tell us the numbers that you want. And then they put this into the manifesto. So I do think that the numbers are probably derived from what the people have said out there. Now, the question of whether we've got the economy that can actually provide these wages, now that becomes the bigger economic conversation of then saying, what type of conditions would you need to have in order for all these marginalized workers, because we have to acknowledge that these people are marginalized, what economic condition would we need to have in order for them to then be able to say, look, we believe that the economy can afford a wage that we have. And that, of course, speaks to the question that until we start growing the economy, we're not going to be able to afford these wages. So it really then takes us back to the question of grow the bigger pie so that even the people who are participants in it, being these workers, can then actually participate meaningfully.
Okay, we're just running out of time. Before we head back to studio, just lastly, him expressing unhappiness with the newly appointed NPA boss, and that is Advocate Shamila Batoy, who started her service yesterday, saying that he does not have confidence in her. She was brought to the position with the help and influence of Minister Pravin Gordhan, and also saying that he will not be supporting her, taking, making sweeping statements. How do we interpret that? In the same breath, he's also saying the country's criminal justice system needs to be strengthened to work for the poor, but he is not happy with Shamila Batoy.
It is quite problematic when you see all these very obvious contradictions out here, because if you actually read through the manifesto, one of the big policy proposals, which I'm fully in support of, is that they're saying that the NPA should become a Chapter 9 institution so that it becomes more insulated from the political interference of the ANC government that we've seen over the past 10 to 15 years. That is a very good idea to have in principle. Now, for him to then, on the same breath, then say, I'm not respecting the newly appointed, NPA head, whom, let's be fair, was appointed in a very transparent process, is then the type of contradiction that is very difficult to reconcile. The theory that Pravin Gordhan had an influence in this is obviously something that is unsubstantiated. I mean, we witnessed all the interviews, and I struggle to see what exactly was Pravin Gordhan's influence in the choice of this particular candidate. We all know that there were two outstanding candidates, Andrea Johnson and Shamila Batoy, and the president had to choose one of the two. So I didn't take it seriously when he started talking about Pravin Gordhan. He obviously has a long-standing feud with Pravin Gordhan that has nothing to do with this particular conversation. So he just slid that in. It is really unnecessary and completely unsubstantiated.
All right, thank you so much there. Political analyst Khaya Sithole helping me to unpack the EFF's election manifesto that was delivered just a while ago here at the Giant Stadium in Soshanguve. Of course, we saw the party president, Julius Malema, going into detail in terms of what their policy is, but the big question remains, do they have a proper implementation strategy, or is this just political rhetoric ahead of the elections? So let's hear from my colleague on the ground, of course, Abongile Dumako. No. I think we are going to give back to studio. It is a wrap from us here on the ground. Thank you for watching.
Africa mama, awusabuthathi Africa. From Cape to Cairo, our Morocco to Madagascar, but in Tanzania is Solitata Gepazoga, Aule Iaza. Soitata EFF, away from Cape to Cairo.
You're locked on to the SABC News Channel. Vibrant scenes there out of the Grand Giant Stadium in Soshanguve, where the EFF's charismatic leader, Julius Malema, has just launched the party's election manifesto. In Pretoria, more news at the top of the hour. Do stay with us.